back. This lesson we're going to finish up what we were talking about with aggregate supply. And we're going to look at two different aggregate supply curves. We're going to look at the classical long-run aggregate supply, and we're going to look at the Keynesian long-run aggregate supply. So just real quick, this is the short-run aggregate supply, and remember the short run is upward sloping because of the idea of fixed contracts. And hang on just a sec. All right. The idea of fixed contracts. So if the price level rises, then they can raise their price in the short run, but they don't have to raise their costs of producing the products don't go up because they're under fixed contracts. And let me just make one other final thought on this. When the year is up, so after 1 year, what's going to happen to these fixed contracts? You know, if you're working for them, you're going to say that I need more money, and so that is an increase in resource costs. And so what happens is when inflation goes up, they do have this temporary time where they can earn extra profits, but after the contracts are renegotiated, that's going to cause this short-run supply curve to shift back to the left because of an increase in resource costs. So that's it for that one. So what we're going to talk about now is this idea of the monetarist or the new classical model of long-run aggregate supply. All right. And so this is a graph you should be able to draw. So if they say, you know, draw this long-run aggregate supply curve. All right. So and by long run we mean that all of the factors can be changed. All right. There are no fixed factors, and so land, labor, capital, all those can be changed. So anyway, when we look at this, go ahead and draw this graph. Remember, Q here stands for GDP real. All right, and then over here we have the price level. And so for the monetarists or the new classical folks, they think that this is the long-run aggregate supply that regardless of where the price is, price level could be there, it could be there, it could be there, that the output is going to be fixed, all right, at one spot. So there is no change in output when the price level changes in the long run. All right, now, can this curve shift? Yes, it certainly can, and we're going to do that in just a little bit. But so, whoops, sorry. Just a snapshot in time, though, so if we were to look at today, you know, the monetarists or the new classical folks would say, here's our long-run aggregate supply. Wherever the price level is, it doesn't really matter because here's how much we can fix. And so you would look at things like capacity utilization, you know, if you take all the factories and all the employees and, you know, see if they're all working, how much can they produce. And the idea is that it's here, all right? And so whether aggregate demand comes across there or there or there, the output is fixed. Now, one other thing, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this later, what if we draw in the aggregate demand curve? And I'm skipping ahead, but I just want to make this point. So here's the aggregate demand curve. What happens if aggregate demand goes up? All right, so increased government spending or something. All right, what's going to happen to the total output under this new classical model? And so you would say, well, they're going to intersect here. And so all we really see is there any increase in output? And so output stayed the same for this aggregate demand curve and that aggregate demand curve. So output stays the same. And the only thing that happens is that there is a change in the price level. Okay, and so if there's a big increase in aggregate demand, we won't get any more output, but we will see an increase in the prices. And one of the things that this model assumes is that there is price and wage flexibility. All right, we'll get, like I say, when we get into equilibrium, we'll get more into this, but this is the key part here, that the monitors have a vertical long-run aggregate supply. All right, and it is, again, long run is independent. Long run supply is independent of the price level. Doesn't matter where the price level is. Here's our supply. All right. Now the next graph that we want to look at is the Keynesian model. All right, and we've dealt some with Keynes already. So let's go ahead and draw this in. Q GDP. That's real. and then we got the price level. So Keynes has uh, three different sections. All right, you can't see this, but that's three different sections. And Keynes starts off with, that's the first section of the Keynes model. All right, and this is called the Keynesian range. All right, and then we have this section of the curve, and that's just called, say, the intermediate range. Draw that up a little bit more. And then we have this. This is the long run. Okay, we'll just say the long run. All right, and so we have these three different sections. And what Keynes was saying is that so this is our overall aggregate supply curve. All right, so Keynesian range, intermediate, and long run. All right, so what happens is, and we're going to foreshadow again a little bit. Let's say that, oops, let's get a different color. Let's say that this is our aggregate demand curve. All right, and we know that equilibrium is going to happen where those two intersect. All right, and so if something happens that's going to bring aggregate demand down, all right, let's say it brings it down to there. What happens to the quantity and the price level? So the quantity goes down and the price level goes down, all right, from there to there. Now, if we're here, what's going to happen if aggregate demand shifts to there? All right, the quantity is going to go down, but notice what happens. The price level stays the same. All right, and so this is why they call this wage and price downward inflexibility. All right, and so Keynes said that once you get past a certain point that the price level drops to a certain point, it's not going to drop anymore. All right, all we're going to do is have a lot of unemployed people, but wages and prices are generally going to bottom out somewhere and not go below that. And so when we look in this Keynesian range, we would say that there is wage and price downward inflexibility. And right now we're looking at the price level for the most part. All right. And so if aggregate demand goes down there, in this area, in this Keynesian range, there is a lot of unemployed resources. All right. Unemployed. And this works in the opposite direction. So let's say that we choose a better color than that. So let's say that we're here, all right, and then aggregate demand shifts to here. Why don't we see any increase in the price level? And that's because there are all these unemployed resources. Think of it, if you have 30% of the population out of work, if aggregate demand starts to go up, then employers, they can hire as many people as they want for a long time at a lower wage rate. Okay, only when aggregate demand starts getting up here, resources start getting more scarce. That's when you start to see wages and prices rise, all right, because there's more pressure, more demand for the resources that we have. All right, so, and this is what it's talking about, different levels of spare capacity. So in this range, my lord, that's gotten really ugly. All right, give me just a second. Let me clear all this and do it over so it's not quite such a mess. Draw this real quick. It's an interesting color. If you're watching this late at night, that should wake you up. All right, so there's the aggregate supply, price level, quantity, GDP, real. This is the Keynesian range. This is the intermediate, and this is the long run. So when we look at this idea of spare capacity, all right, if we are in this Keynesian range, what is going on with spare capacity? And by capacity, we mean how many factories aren't being used and how many workers aren't being used. So the resources, there's a lot of unemployed resources. And so if we're in this Keynesian range, and we would say that we have a lot of spare capacity. All right. Once we start to hit this intermediate range, spare capacity starts to get down because now we're using more and more of our scarce resources. We're starting to hit the limit of the number of resources that we have. All right. And then once we finally hit this long run, there is no spare capacity. And that just says that, look, everybody's working, all right? And so let's say aggregate demand is green. If aggregate demand cuts across here, and then it moves up even farther, notice what happens to the quantity that's being produced. The quantity doesn't change, now it's only the price level. And so as we move along, Here we have a lot of unemployed resources, and again, this is quantity being produced down here, so as the quantity, as we move to the right, you're going to have greater employment, all right? And so you can, if we start moving here, and production starts to increase, so now I'm just taking aggregate demand and just starting to shift it out. As we go up, here in this Keynesian range, we have a lot of spare capacity, spare extra resources that aren't being used, unemployed resources. As we now get to this intermediate range, more and more people are starting to become employed. There is an upward pressure on prices and wages, and so that's why you see it coming up like that. And then once we hit here, we can't produce, according to this, all right, and we're going to look at a different model in just a second, but according to this, we're at our maximum. We can't produce over here because everybody's working, and this would be unattainable. All right, so that's the Keynesian model. All right, so Keynesian three parts talks about spare capacity and wage price, downward inflexibility. This is a big distinction between Keynes and the monetarists and New Classical because they believe that there is no that prices and wages are flexible. All right. Now one more slide. So explain using the two models how factors leading to changes in the quantity well, in short, how do these curves shift? All right, and so let's draw both of them. So PL, and that's quantity GDP, real, and we've got price level there, quantity GDP, real. So this is our new classical, or the monetarist. We'll say long run aggregate supply. And this is our Keynesian range, or our Keynesian aggregate supply model. All right, and so what's going to cause, is this a good thing if these curves shift out? All right, and so I want you to think about it. So let's say that here's where we're operating. All right, and so let's say that this is $10 trillion worth of real GDP. Is it good for this curve to shift out? What does that imply? What does that tell us if this curve shifts out to say there? All right, that is a very good thing because this is an increase in real GDP, which is economic growth. All right, and so if you're looking at this model, the only way to achieve economic growth is to have this long-run aggregate supply curve shift out. And so the big question is, what causes this curve to shift? And it's the same over here. If this curve shifted like this, not very good there, but if this curve shifted this way, we're going to be better off, all right, because wherever aggregate demand intersects, if we move from there to there, then that is increasing total output. And when total output goes up, well, skip that thought. All right, so this shows us economic growth. All right, so what would cause those changes to happen? And this is a phrase that I want you to learn and be able to write down that I would expect to see on a test, and that is a change in the quantity or quality of the factors of production. And yes, I know it's already written at the top, but just for emphasis, I want you to write it again. All right, quantity and quality of the factors of production, including improvements in efficiency. And so if we can just flat out do it faster or better. New technology, reductions in unemployment. All right, and institutional changes. Institutional changes could be tax laws. It could be things like getting rid of minimum wage. It could be things that would increase labor mobility. One of the interesting challenges that we face right now is it's hard for workers. Let's say that this is going to be ugly. Here's the U.S. Something like that. So let's say that there's a whole bunch of jobs here, all right, and let's say that there's a whole bunch of workers here. The problem is what's happened with the housing market. And so let's say that you were a worker here and you had bought a house and you borrowed $150,000 to buy it, and now let's say that it's been 2 years and you've paid off a little bit, but now the house is valued at $100,000. All right. In order for you to get and move to this job out here, you got to sell your house. But if you sell your house for $100,000 and you still owe the bank close to $150,000, you can't do it because you're stuck. You're stuck in your house. And so one of the issues that we've had in the U.S. after this recession in the housing bubble bursting, is that labor mobility has seemingly been not disabled, but has been diminished. All right, because people are what they call upside down in their houses. So let's see. There we go. So anyway, so any of these things will cause a change, an outward shift of the aggregate supply curve, whether it's the new classical and monetarist or it's the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. If the land changes, think about the natural gas. We've gotten better at pulling natural gas out of the ground in the U.S., and so you would expect to see something like that shift the curve out because we're being more efficient with our use of the land. Labor as well, if we open up immigration, then that'll cause this to shift out. So it's land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Anything that makes those more efficient, better, changing the quality or the quantity. Let me make one last note. Sorry, regarding this. There's one more graph that is similar to these and that shows economic growth, and this is one that you should be able to conjure up on a test. And so if I said, show me another graph that demonstrates economic growth, then you should be able to say that this is the production possibilities frontier, that any shift out, this is curve A and curve B, that also demonstrates economic growth. And so there's a real close connection between the production possibilities frontier, or the PPC, and shift and showing growth with the Keynes supply curve, or the monetarist supply curve. Sorry about that. So anyway, that's it for this one. Until next time.